Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've had a wonderful few days since I last saw you. Today, in everything you need to know, I have a jam-packed one for you because I put quite a bit of effort into this video and I felt like the game week dictated as such. So today we have whether you should be selling Salah or Isak, whether you should be taking hits, match interpretations for some of the games that are to be upcoming, captaincy, 5 different free hit drafts, all of different styles, and candidates for players which you could buy. Aside from that, if you enjoy the video, please do drop a like on it. And equally, if you have been enjoying the content around here and you have not subscribed yet, or if you're a new viewer and you're considering cashing in on some of the luck and analysis that we've had so far, then consider subscribing as well, as we're so close to 7,000 subscribers and it would be great to hit it resultant of this video. Apart from that, nothing else needs to be said, so let's get into it. Now, this video will likely be done in such a way, resultant of how the game week dynamics have panned out, that each section almost intertwines with another. So, for example, if you're not on a free hit, I encourage you to at least watch that section for a little bit, just so you can hear some specific insights that you may not hear in another section, because I save it for there, or it's just relevant for that section. But to start, should you be taking hits? And in more cases than not, I would say absolutely yes. The first example, let's say you have 10 players. Bringing in another player to give yourself a full team would mean a downside of 4 points and probably nothing more. Because let's say you bring them in, they don't do anything, they get 0 points. Well, your other player who was going to be in that position, because he didn't have a game, was going to get 0 anyway. So your downside is capped at -4. Whereas your upside to bringing them in is around 12 points. Let's just say their ceiling is about 16. For example, if you're bringing in a mid, that would be about a brace. And I would say for most midfielders, that is about their ceiling. Equally, if you're bringing in a forward, I would say the forwards available compared to the mids available this week are of a slightly different nature. I would say the forwards are maybe ones who are certainly more associated with scoring goals relative to what it usually is. So, for example, there's no Salah to bring in, right? He's a mid who can outscore pretty much any forward in terms of goal scoring. But the mids this week, they can't do it in comparison to the forwards as much, I would say. So, for example, Evanescence, Wisser, Wood, Strand Larsen, like I could see them getting a couple goals, and who knows, maybe they get a couple goals in assists, given the fixtures they have and given some of their forms at least. So I would say your upside is around 12 points. As long as you therefore have some level of conviction or even just a bit of hope, I think from a strategic standpoint alone, it makes sense. But especially when you factor in the fact that you have some level of conviction and some level of hope that the player is going to do well, when this is the downside on offer in comparison to the upside, for me, there's no reason why you shouldn't be taking as many hits as possible to get to 11 players. Now, of course, there will be some situations where the team dynamics dictate that it's significantly harder to take a hit. Let's just say, for example, to get an 11 out, you would absolutely have to sell Salah, and you're really against that, and you want to keep him for Game Week 30 and retain the value so you don't have to buy him back on Wildcard 31 at a more expensive price. Okay, that I understand. Maybe as a result, the only route to taking a hit is for a defender. And there is quite literally no defender that you like, and you back pretty much everyone to concede. And as such, you don't want to gamble, and you're happy to just have 0 points there. And let's just say the guy you bring in gets 1 or 2, you'll end on a profit of 2 to 3 points, right? In that sense, I completely get it. However, especially for the attacking slots, I would try and put out 7 attacking slots. Because for me, when this is your downside comparison to your upside, and as we will discuss later in the video, where there are certainly opportunities to be had, for example, in the Bournemouth-Brentford game, in the Manchester City-Brighton game, in the Leicester-Man United game, and others as well, I think there are enough opportunities whereby you should be taking these hits. Now, I would say in general, hits are perceived in quite a negative way, right? Which is fair enough. I think in general, the most successful players that you can see over the last X amount of years, even though this season's very different, but even this one, they don't tend to take too many hits. Now, whether that's a good or bad thing is something we'll come on to maybe in preseason. It's certainly an avenue which I would like to explore. But I would say in general, they certainly are currently perceived in quite a negative way. But I would reframe this, because if you frame it like that to yourself, then it serves as a deterrent for you to take these type of hits. But if you view it as an investment, I think it seems much better. Maybe taking out Salah and Isak for a -4, and then bringing in Haaland and Kluivert, and this is just an example, nets you 20 plus points this week, and then in Game Week 30, it nets you another 10, let's just say, as an example. And then, yeah, sure, you've lost value when you want them both back on Wildcard 31, but the 0.7 is going to contribute to you losing 30 points down the line, right? So in that sense, the investment would be worth it, even though when you get to Wildcard 31, it wouldn't be as good. Maybe you're on the fence about whether you want Salah, but you just think that one player could do so well this week. So you're accepting of the risk and you just see it as a little bit of an investment. And you know that even if you lose a bit of value down the line, with the upside on offer, it can kind of cover that and what change that's going to make to your points down the line. So just reframe it to yourselves like that, because I think the downside is fairly minimal, unless you have like a really specific wildcard 31 draft, which is going to be hugely affected by selling Salah or Isak. But apart from that, I would be taking hits in most spots. Considering we were just discussing whether you should be selling players for hits, let's discuss two players in particular who are at the forefront of many minds as to whether they should be sold for a hit to facilitate some upside in another form. And that is Alexander Isak and Mohamed Salah. Well, I can't account for everyone's purchasing price and selling price for Alexander Isak, but I'll use probably what I think will be the most common one and the most realistic one as well, considering at the times in which people would buy him. So let's say that you bought Isak at 8.6, and let's say now his selling price is 9, given his price is 9.4. That means you would lose 0.4 should you have to buy him back in Wildcard 31 at that price. However, let's just assume that due to the volume of sales, he drops by 0.1, and you actually have to pick him back up for 0.3 million more. That's not ideal, but I think it's hardly the end of the world, and it's certainly not a good enough justification, in my opinion, to not go and attack upside, especially if you have a level of conviction for 0.3 million, right? I think you'll definitely make those points back in the next few weeks, 2-3 weeks, on the assumption you get it right. Obviously, if you get it wrong, then so be it. But like the point is, you think you're gonna be right in making this move. So I don't think that 0.3 million / even 0.4 million is enough of a deterrent to sway you away from going to Marmoush or Wood or Haaland or whoever you like. Now, if you are going to bring a forward in and you're not going to captain them in this game week or the next, then I think it becomes a little bit more difficult to justify, and that's where I think it becomes more situational. But in most cases, I would say that selling him for it absolutely fine, given what you're facilitating elsewhere, and given like 0.3, 0.4, biggest deal. The much harder one, the much harder one, is the selling Salah conundrum. Now, I know a lot of you have made your minds up and you're like, you're not going to sell him. I think perfectly acceptable. I, for one, have swayed slightly, more due to a shift in perspective on Haaland. I mean, slightly less bullish than I was maybe yesterday, as opposed to like being higher on the Salah. But nonetheless, I'm still really strongly considering it, and you'll find out in team selection, as I will, when I record it, what I will be doing, because I'm still not sure yet. But this is the conundrum, and I thought I would set it up as an equation, so you can really see what you're taking on / missing out on. You would have Palmer for 2 fixtures, Palmer away at Arsenal and Palmer at home in 30 for Spurs. You would also have, let's just say you sell Salah, you're only really going to be selling him for Haaland, and you're probably going to captain him if you bring him in. So you would have Haaland for Brighton at home and Leicester at home. Let's just assume a captain for that 2 fixtures, because it's doubles. That's 6 fixtures right there, yeah? Of Palmer for Arsenal away, Spurs at home, and then Haaland captain for Brighton at home and Leicester at home. Alternatively, let's say you weren't to go for Erling Haaland and you were to captain someone else, therefore, in game week 29, I think you'd probably go and captain Chris Wood. So you'd captain Chris Wood away at Ipswich. You would also have Salah captain at home in game week 30 for the Everton fixture. I'd assume if you have him, you'll captain him. And obviously that forward spot that isn't taken up by Haaland will be vacated. Hence, I'm just going to assume that you're also not going to sell Isak. You're going to keep both of them, and that will be the forward spot. I know it says Brentford away. It should say Brentford at home, but I've deleted the slide, so apologies about that. So it's those 6 fixtures versus those 5. As you can see, especially considering it involves the big 3 in Palmer, Salah, and Haaland, and also it's not like Chris Wood and Alexander Isak are poor assets in any way, especially considering Wood's got more points than any forward this season. That is really, really swingy stuff. And it's got the makings of huge swings over just 2 weeks. So I thought I would just set it out for you so you can see what it's actually like in reality over the 2 weeks and decide from there. As things stand, I think I still prefer having the 6 games as opposed to 5. And I think I prefer the Haaland captaincy in game week 30. And that's probably enough to swing me that way. But we'll see, because I do think that Wood's captain in 29 is very close to the Haaland captain in 29. So then it's like, oh, maybe I keep Salah, because obviously it's not just the fixtures on screen, but it's also the retained value of 0.5 million should you wish to purchase him back on wildcard 31. Now, that's not a given, because you might not be wildcarding in 31. You might not want him in 31, depending how the cup fixtures play out and how the schedule falls and whether you just want him or not in isolation. But you have to hold that, at least in some wait, because at some point it's going to be a factor in your decision making whether you should or you shouldn't get back Salah, and that will have a effect on it, right? Because that 0.5 will weaken your wildcard elsewhere should you sell him and wish to get him back later. That's my opinion on that. And now we will go to the match interpretation for how the game's going to go, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Now, I put quotation marks around match analysis because it's not exactly that. It is, I guess, predicting the game somewhat, and I'm just essentially sharing few thoughts that I have as to how and why the games could go in a certain way, which I think could aid your selection process. Hence why I've done this different subtopic, which I wouldn't usually do. One game I really want to make reference to for Blank Game Week 29 is Brighton versus Bournemouth a couple game weeks ago when Bournemouth went to the Amex. I thought that they didn't do a brilliant job at defending Brighton as a whole. And where I put connectivity there, I'm not sure if that's actually like a phrase that's used in football, but it's the word that I found best to encompass what I meant. Brighton's combinations in the middle, the way that they used their attacking talent and the way they interacted with each other and the way they connected with each other, I thought was really good, and it pulled Bournemouth apart at times, and they made a lot of chances resultant of that. Nor did I think Bournemouth did the best job in containing the 1v1 threat and the attacking talent that Brighton had, but also a sense of directness in some of their attacks. I remember when they would pick the ball up in the middle, couple passes, very vertical passes, and they would go when they would get the ball into Matoma, even when they would go wide and they put crosses into the box and cutbacks. I thought in general they look quite threatening. Now, the reason I bring this up is I think Brentford very much do have similar weapons in their locker to Brighton. I think they've got that connectivity. I think you look at Wissa, you look at Mbeumo, you look at Damsgaard, you look at Charlotte, you look at the relationships they have with each other, that you look at the movements on and off the ball in terms of how they're interacting with each other. And I think that could certainly hurt Bournemouth, and that could certainly be a route to points, goals for them. They've got 1v1 threat, not just like in wide areas. I think when you hear 1v1 threat, you often think about like that in wide areas, but I think in the middle as well with like Wissa and Sharda and Damsgaard in their own way. They've got that. They've got the talent. They've got the directness. Look at how fast they play. And they play in a very vertical fashion at times as well, right? So I think they've got all of that, and as such, I really wouldn't be surprised for them to score. Equally, I thought whilst Brighton have certainly conceded less defensive transitions as of late, and for example, in the game against Forest where they got ripped 7-0, that happened a lot and they got punished, but ever since that game it hasn't been anywhere near as bad. Obviously, Believer coming back has helped them massively. I do still think, however, whilst the volume has gone down, when they concede those type of transitions, they are dangerous. And their opponents, Manchester City, Savio, Doku, Marmoush, Foden, and obviously Haaland up top, even Vardy, to be honest, to an extent as well. I know he's a defender, but if you think about Balde's goal, Rafinha's goal, and Balde's assist yesterday, something of that type of nature, well, City have the weapons to do that. So I really wouldn't be surprised if City score anywhere between 2 to 4 goals in that game as well. So those are just some notes that I thought I'd bring up, and maybe that could aid in your selection process. And now let's go and look at the flip side of that. Now, that analysis was one which was quite bullish on Brentford's part, being able to go to the Vitality and score some goals. But what about the flip side? Bournemouth are dangerous. I mean, they are really dangerous. If you just look at what they did to Spurs, yeah, okay, the game was 2-2. Realistically, that could have been like a 4-5-0. That could have even been like 6-0. And I don't think any Spurs fan could realistically argue with the result. Bakari made about 3 big saves in the game. Kluivert hit the post. They missed some other chances. And they scored some good goals as well. They were brilliant in attack. And had they been a bit more ruthless, well, they would have been walking away with 3 points and an even closer grip on their top 4 charge. That's football. In transition, Brentford, we've obviously seen a somewhat susceptible, and just because of the way they play, and to an extent, and no, definitely due to the players they have, not in a bad way, that's just how they are. And when you have a side like Bournemouth, Semenyo, Evanilson back as well, Kluivert, Tavernier, I guess, because you assume he plays off the right, that's a lot of firepower. And I think they can hurt Brentford. And as such, I think they can score goals. I do think that you'll see Evanilson drop in a little bit more, even like in transition. So for example, if they win the ball around the halfway line, and then he'll drop in a little bit more just to facilitate the move, and then you could see Kluivert maybe run off him or find a pocket of space when the attack is further progressed as a result. And Evanilson's higher. I also think you can see Semenyo like maybe hitting the half spaces a little bit more than he usually does. He had one against like Brighton where he went from like out to in, and he really should have scored. Like that type of stuff I can see happening against Brentford. And as such, I really like the prospects of their attackers for this game, even if it's just one of them to get a haul. It's kind of difficult to predict which one's going to hit, but I think having any of them is Good idea. And then on the flip side for the Manchester City-Brighton game as well, if you look at the Brighton City game the first time they played this season, one thing that Guardiola's side really struggled with in the second half is the intensity of Brighton and how aggressive they were. And this is something Hertzler speaks about a lot, and he spoke about it in the post-match interview when they played Fulham, and he was like, oh, the intensity could have been a bit higher. And knowing how important this was against Manchester City the first time around, from going from really getting beat badly in the first half in terms of the performance to beating them badly in the second half, I imagine he goes there and tries to replicate something similar to what they did in the second half. I imagine quite an aggressive 4-2-4 press. But this time is a different City side. They'll have Kusanov, they'll have Nico Gonzalez, and they'll have Omar Mamouche as like a transitional weapon as well. And they'll have a more refined Savio, which I think will be a big, big plus. So it's difficult to call exactly which way that's going to go, but I think you have to be wary of like both sides of it. Not just that, like, oh, Manchester City are going to roll them over, but let's just say they do go for the midfield pairing of like Mamouche, Foden, and Nico Gonzalez, effectively, right? But then all of a sudden, without Kovacic's retention in the middle, and you've got Mamouche, who's more of a runner. He's also not, I think, completely understood Pep's like midfield game and what he wants. Foden very much has now, right? But I still don't think he provides you the same type of retention, or at least from the same areas as Kovacic does, given they're completely different players. So in that sense, Brighton can nick the ball, and especially with that aggressiveness and intensity, and transition on them and make it hard for City in that sense, right? So I think a goal from Brighton is very much on the cards, not to mention the attacking quality they have and how well they attack space. Then on the flip side, though, like City have so much quality. As I've expressed, they've got the weapons to hurt Brighton, and the quality, that's something I didn't really touch on, more so the weapons before. And the other thing is Brighton are going for like top 4. They'll have that in their minds. And I wonder, like, given it's away as well, the expectation of that, the experience of being in this type of situation, and the environment, given it's away from home, how that comes into play. So I think both games theoretically should be ones that throw up goals. I'd say that City probably have a little bit too much for Brighton personally. And then Bournemouth-Brentford, I think, is a little bit more open to interpretation. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way. But regardless, in both games, I think there should be goals. Now, for example, maybe you think that, oh, I don't want Guardiola as such. I still think you can get attacking returns. I just don't think the clean sheet is super likely. And I thought I'd just basically give you that bit of analysis, and you can take and do whatever you would like with it. Now, 2 games missing from this slide are Ipswich versus Nottingham Forest, which we will discuss in the captaincy section. And the other one is Fulham versus Spurs, and we'll discuss that a little bit in the free hit section. Theoretically, from a practical standpoint, we've lost a lot of transitional threat, right? There's no Jackson, there's no Madueke. That's a big deal. That's a big deal to lose, right? And we're not in the best of form either. I think we're struggling against those like more compact, deeper blocks, which Arsenal will like transition into. They always do in these type of games. And as such, even when they're in the mid block, I think we'll find it difficult. And as such, they shouldn't have too many issues. If you look at our weapons to transition, our front line of like Neto, Sancho, and Nkunku, well, that's not great in that sense. And also, even in terms of breaking down those deeper blocks, I don't think Neto will do a brilliant job in terms of occupying those centre-backs and causing them problems and being able to find a yard and manipulate and link in these small spaces. Then similarly, I don't think Nkunku's necessarily got a required physical level to be particularly effective, even if he is to enter the half spaces fairly frequently. Sancho, I think, is a good weapon, but still, he's not like an elite player as well, right? And then Palmer's maybe not in his best form, so for all of those reasons, I don't think we should cause Arsenal too many problems. Also, with the way we set up from a defensive standpoint, they should be able to hurt us. We're not going to do what Man United did. We'll be a bit more open. And as such, I don't think that the problems they've had recently will come to the forefront as much, right? They really should beat us. Like, on paper, I don't see why they shouldn't. However, they keep finding ways at the moment just not to win in the league. And as we all know, football is not just what I've discussed, but it's very much like form and mentality and psychology and confidence, right? And all these other factors. And the fact that they keep finding ways, well, like it's been 3 games, but 3 games quite a lot, especially at the moment. And the reason I bring up 3 games is you can even make it 4, including the victory against Leicester, because that's the one where Kai Havertz has been absent from, given he got the injury. But they didn't play particularly well against Leicester. Yes, they won 2-0. They didn't play particularly well. Then they lost to West Ham. Big up Graham Potter. Then they drew away to Nottingham Forest. They were all right. Actually, no. That's harsh. I thought they were actually quite good. Maybe even more deserving of the 3 points. They were pretty decent that day. And then they weren't really that great at Man United. Yeah, they controlled the game in the first half at least, but in the second half, not so much, and they weren't particularly penetrating and threatening either, right? So I wouldn't be surprised, even with everything that I discussed, if Chelsea find a way, if we score, if Palmer, Neto, and Nkunku, Sancho, from maybe, who knows, a set piece, we get a goal. Naturally, it's unlikely, especially from a set piece, but it's not like we're starved of quality. Enzo, Caicedo, Palmer, I guess like Nkunku, Sancho, and Neto in moments, like here or there, maybe Neto in transition, and then the defense as well. There's enough quality to make a moment and then make the game difficult, especially when it's not going Arsenal's way. So I thought I would present both sides, the footballing and the not so footballing standpoint of both of those games. Well, that particular game for both of those sides. We'll come back to Wolves in a second. I want to put emphasis on the fact that Man United are a much better side than Leicester. And usually, if you had a differential team in its own right? Because like not many people own Bruno, and then pretty much no one owns any other Man United assets, and they're away to Leicester, people will be jumping on them. And yeah, they play Thursday, so that's not great in terms of like the turnaround. But I do think that there is an opportunity here, particularly with like the defenders. I wouldn't be surprised if like one of them, whether that be Mazraoui or Dallo, picks up a haul. I think they certainly could. And then equally, I thought Garnacho's looked much better off the right for a long period of time now. And he looks to have that spot nailed down following a good performance against Arsenal. And then obviously you got Bruno as well, right? So I think that should just be given a bit more weight in your decision making than maybe it is being done, just from what I see in the general consensus. It is still a much better Man United side with quality away at Leicester. Everton West Ham to me feels like flipping. And when you see my free hit drafts, of which there are 5, there is not a single asset from Everton or West Ham, because I think it is such a difficult game to call. There are so many variables which contradict each other in terms of being able to predict the result. Which one do I go for, right? Okay, Everton are at home, they're good form, they're probably set up in this type of deep block. Do West Ham have the weapons to break that? Well, maybe, because they've got Kudus and Paquetá, but maybe not because of the system, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So for me, I'm avoiding it. I don't think it's a bad play to go there. For example, if you have some conviction that Everton or West Ham keep clean sheet, I think that's good. Theoretically, this game shouldn't have too many goals given how the side's set up. Maybe you think Bowen goes to Goodison and does the job and gets a brace, or you think Kudus or Souček, who's due another goal following his miss against Newcastle, gets one, right? Okay, by all means. But for me, the reason I've avoided it, I feel like it's such a difficult game to call. Both teams playing pretty well at the moment, and as such, I just feel like I'm gambling, right? So, and I don't really want to do that in this spot. I think in some spots it's fine, where the upside's not like massively present with any of their players, and there's good options elsewhere. I wouldn't. I think you could have the perspective that in general the fixtures for the defenders aren't great. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Southampton score. I wouldn't be surprised if Brighton score. I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea score, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ipswich score, or even Leicester score. And that all of a sudden means that all your Gabriel, Gvardiol, Ait-Nouri, Sells, Aina Milenkovic, Anana, Dallo clean sheets, they're all wiped, right? And I don't think it's necessarily like super unlikely that any of that happens. And in that case, I think there's definitely 1-0 on the cards for one. Wolves can play now. They're not so stagnant and slow like they were under Gary O'Neill for times. Even without Matthias Cunha against Everton, I thought some of the patterns of play, I thought the rhythm and tempo to it, I thought it was good. And I think this is a requirement against Southampton, given how aggressive they are and how aggressive they can be, to have this type of rhythm and tempo, just being able to play quickly. And they can now, right? So, or at least like here's that they can. So I think that's good. So they can score goals. But so can Southampton, to be honest. Like they've got talent. If you look at the game against Liverpool, Sulemana, he caused them big problems, right? And even just take him and Tyler Dibbling alone, and Fernandes as well. That's enough. That really is enough to score against Wolves as well. So if you're going to buy Ait-Nouri, or even if you're considering doubling, just be aware that like it's far from a slam dunk. And now let's move on to captaincy. Moving on to captaincy. Now, you will see some options in brackets. Pivot, Wissa, Bruno, and maybe I could have put Semenyo, or Mbeumo, or Marmoush. For me, all of those differential options, they have some merit to them, but, and I'm happy to discuss them in Solving Your Problems should you wish, just let me know in the comments, and in Solving Your Problems I will discuss Wildcard 29 and benching dilemmas and anything else you would like, so just let me know. But for me, there are two that are a fair bit in front of the rest at the moment, and that is Erling Haaland and Chris Wood. No surprises there. For me, at the moment, I would say that Erling Haaland probably has a better ceiling than Chris Wood, and Chris Wood probably has a better floor than Erling Haaland. The reasons I'd say that Chris Wood has a better floor is, one, and I mean this with the greatest respect, but Brighton are of a higher quality than the Ipswich side that Forest play. They're also in much better form than the Ipswich side. And with the way that Chris Wood scores goals, and one thing I've noticed about Ipswich, and this is a bit of a analysis. It's very much a subjective, abstract bit, but it's just something I've noticed is they'll concede from like certain types of movement. So that's why I put arrivers there. People who are really good at coming and box crashing and arriving on the end of a cutback and putting in from like in and around the box. People who can just find a little yard where there maybe isn't for other players in and around the box. They can see those type of goals a fair bit. Just subtle movements, even on the edge of the box in the half spaces to really hurt them. They just can see those type of goals a lot compared to like other teams who can see like a more traditional like transitional goal, for example. They just concede quite a few times. Wood's definitely got like that ability to hurt them in that fashion. I think Gibbs White could potentially be a decent shout, and even Alanga as well. And in general, with the quality of Nottingham Forest, with the fact that they both threaten transitions, and honestly they can break down deeper blocks now as well, I think they've certainly improved in that fashion. Not to like the extent that maybe would win the league, but to an extent that I think is certainly impressive. I can see him scoring and doing fairly well. On the other hand, I think when you have the quality of Erling Haaland and you have that transitional element to the Brighton game, and again, you just have the quality of arguably the world's best striker in a team that I think will be quite good against Brighton. Like I think they'll put a strong team out. I think Savio, Doku, Mamouche, Foden, I think they'll cause Brighton some problems behind Haaland to help him. I would say he's got a high ceiling, but given Brighton's quality, I'd say that the floor's slightly lower. So which one do you go for, right? I've obviously spoken about how the Brighton City game could pan out previously, and that was kind of my Wood bit of analysis on the Ipswich game. Like I said, I don't have a definitive answer for you at the moment. I think it is super close. I'm hoping to have one I'll have one to some extent in team selection tomorrow, if not solving your problems. If I had to go right now and pick one, I think I might genuinely go with Chris Wood, just because whilst I say he has a better floor and not a ceiling, I still think that the ceiling for him there, given what I saw from Ipswich against Palace, is still around that like 13, maybe even 16 point mark. And I just really, really trust him at the moment. Whereas I'm not sure I trust Manchester as much at the moment. So maybe I would have Wood just marginally out in front. But we shall see if that changes by the time we get to team selection. Let's now look at some free hit drafts. And this is probably going to be the least popular side out of the free hit drafts for the ones I've created. But these are more aggressive ones. So you look at the one on the left, and that is very much a Brentford stack. So you can safely assume that pretty much everyone will have some Bournemouth. And you, given that you went for this draft on the assumption you did, would basically be saying, nope, I don't think they're going to do well. I think they'll have a lot of shots on target. Flecken will save them. He'll haul. Mbeumo and Whistle will do their thing. They'll haul. And I'll be up a bunch of points on everyone who targeted Bournemouth. That's what you'd basically be saying. On top of that, you'd be saying that Forest go to Ipswich. They do really well. I spoke about Alanga and how I thought he could do well. You obviously have Chris Wood and Ole Einar because, and the reason I have him ahead of Murillo and Milenkovic is it's very difficult to score a headed set-piece goal against Ipswich. So I thought like the open play threat would just make more sense in terms of assists, mainly assists and goals to an extent. That's why you would go there. And then the rest, I guess, is fairly self-explanatory. Aside from maybe Alejandro Garnacho. I spoke about him earlier, though. I think the threat he's posing on the right side, picture that he's got, the fact that he might have found some form as well, I think will be really good. And considering they're there, why not discuss them? Nori, mainly doing that for the attack and return as opposed to like feeling really confident about the clean sheet, albeit the prospects for that are higher than most other teams. And then Guardiola, because big game Guardiola certainly likes a goal. So even if he concedes, I can see him scoring or getting an attack and return or returning from a set piece because he's very good in the air. Haaland's just Haaland, right? The other side would be one where you fade Nottingham Forest, again, hence why I said it's aggressive, and you think that Ipswich do a job. If Ipswich are going to do a job on Forest and beat them, Liam Delap's probably going to be on the score sheet or in the assist book, hence why I've selected him. I guess if you're going to back against Forest, you may as well back on Ipswich to an extent, and this isn't like some huge risk that you're taking. And he's shown himself to have a ceiling as well, like a decent ceiling. And in this case, you would basically, you could replace the triple Brentford with Bournemouth and rejig the squad. Or you could replace the triple Bournemouth with Brentford and rejig the squad should you wish and hold that view about Brentford beating Bournemouth. But let's just assume you didn't. Then you could go Semenyo, Clive at Kirkes, right? Now, I'm not so bullish on picking Kirkes because I think Brentford are going to score, but this is, again, an aggressive draft, hence why you're stacking. But Semenyo and Clive, I really like. I really like their prospects for the reasons discussed earlier to pick up some points, hence why they're in. Against Brighton, having runners is certainly useful, hence why I've gone for both in Haaland and Marmoush. The thing about Haaland is, and maybe I should have spoken about this in the captaincy section, is that he does function a bit more as someone who drops in a little bit more, links a little bit more, holds up, they go long to a little bit more ever since Marmoush has come into the side. And I think Pep's allowed for this. And as such, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe like someone running off him scores, and that could very well be Omar Marmoush. And so I've gone for both of them, goal and assist. Maybe Haaland picks up a goal in another fashion. Guardiola obviously spoken about. I didn't speak about Bruno previously. I guess he's just kind of obvious, right, why I picked him. But 3 players to speak about here: Son, Onana, and Dalot. I'll start with Son and Fulham versus Spurs. There's no other Fulham or Spurs players in any of the free hit drafts that you will see. I think it's difficult to expect, maybe not expect Spurs or Son to go and do really well, but very difficult to predict as to what will actually happen, right? Because on one hand, Fulham could go there and give them Fulham could stay there because they're at home, give them a really, really, really tough task, right? Maybe they just drop into that like 4-4-2 mid block, one like hybrid, I guess, at times as well, and Spurs just struggle with breaking it down. And because of how aggressive Spurs can be, Fulham, who aren't necessarily brilliant in their transitions, I think would therefore have an easier time in finding success in those, and maybe he plays like Adama Traore, as well as Alex Iwobi, and hurts them in that fashion, and then maybe plays a wing-back system as well, I don't know, as Robinson bombing down that flank in transition as well. Alternatively, like on the other hand, Son's just scored. They had a comeback against Bournemouth. Maybe that gives him some momentum. Maybe it's given him some momentum. He's obviously a top quality player on penalties, so maybe he scores, and at least you have the possibility of a huge haul, right? This was just a differential. Like I don't really like the pick, but like I said, it was an aggressive pick because it's an aggressive team, hence why differential selection. And then the double United defense for the reasons I discussed earlier. Like Dalot could get a haul in this type of game, and they realistically could keep a clean sheet because they've got the structure to do so. They've shown that in other big games. And if they could just embody some of the philosophies that they do in those games and maybe even swallow their pride, I think Leicester would find it really difficult to score against them. And you're stacking so that if you hit, you hit big. And that's about that team summed up. And now let's move on to the template teams and my favorite team as well. Now, I've got to say, the draft on the left in particular, I like a lot more than the two I've shown previously, or at least I like them more. One thing before we start, the draft on the right, you'll see there are only 10 players. Like I said, there's very much a template draft. Everything about that is pretty much template, aside from maybe going Alanga and instead you would go Gibbs White. But the reason I left that 11th spot open is I know some people will prefer one particular mid, some people prefer another particular forward. You can kind of just put whoever you want in there. But starting with the team on the left, it is fairly template, but it's got a lot of upside to it. Okay, so we're backing on the defenses of Forest, Manchester City, Man United, and Wolves. At least if Forest and Man United keep a clean sheet, you know that Gibbs White and Bruno's floor, unless they get booked, goes up to 3 points, which is always helpful. That's 50% of their usual floor as an increase. You've also got like Semenyo and Kluivert. So if Bournemouth hit and they hit big, you've got 2 mids from their team with higher ceilings, and I've already obviously discussed their prospects. Nothing crazy about any of those selections. Guardiola, spoken about him. Wood, Haaland, spoken about them. Aït-Nouri and Strand Larsen essentially as a combination, because you could very well see Aït-Nouri put a cross into the box, which he does quite often, and Strand Larsen get on the end of it, because this is a dynamic that Wolves certainly try to exploit within their team. And then just in general, having the number 9 with decent minutes, even if it's 70 against Southampton, is always going to be a good prospect. And it's difficult to see this team, especially when there's like a spread in defense and only one double up, doing particularly bad. And the team on the right is like, I would say, even more template, right? You've got Sells, who I've seen as more template than the Ipswich defender. You've got Gabriel, just in case like he scores a bullet header and they keep a clean sheet. That's like a really nice EO like proof. You've only got one Man United defender and one who can get an attack and return. I'd say Dalot's more likely to get an attack and return than Aina. Anyway, Semenyo, Kluivert, Haaland, Wood, Bruno, we've all discussed them. And then Alanga, I think I spoke about Gibbs Alanga last time. But if I'm going to speak about Gibbs White this time, like I said, that guy who can crash the box really well, I think is very useful. And he's been on a brilliant run for a long period of time now. And they're in form, so I wouldn't be surprised if he scores as well. So I think those are 2 very secure template teams. This, however, is my favorite free hit team, because I think it does a good job of providing me with a high floor, while simultaneously providing me with a high ceiling as well. I haven't gone crazy, but I still do have, I guess, 4 double ups, you could say, right? I've got double up in defense, and I've got 3 double ups in attack. Now, I think crazy would have been maybe going for a triple defensive stack. Oh, not crazy, but just like really aggressive. Would have been going for a triple defensive stack and then just double attacking stacks like I've done basically with one other. Only a little shift. But nonetheless, I think at least only having a one double up in defense gives me a higher floor, I guess you could say, to the team. And the double ups I have gone for in attack are all with good fixtures. And 2 of them at home, and the one that's away is at Ipswich. And pretty much everyone there is in good enough form. Like Elanga's been in decent form. Maybe not super recently, but as only a couple weeks ago, you would have said so. Chris Wood's like just Chris Wood. Clive at Semenyo, I think they've been playing really well. Semenyo, not to the same level, but I think returns are due. And then I've got Marmoush in there purely because I think, as I expressed earlier, the runner could have some success in the Brighton game and maybe he functions. Whereas that Guardiola for the upside, especially if City hit and maybe getting a golden assist as a pair for a goal, maybe crosses one in or lays it off, cuts it back, and Marmoush or Holland gets on the end of it. I've got Nacho because I think he's in good form, and if Bruno's to play deeper, maybe he could be the beneficiary of that. And then, like I said, I just think Man United are a lot better than Leicester, and they have, in my opinion, the best chance for getting a clean sheet this game week, if not for Nottingham Forest. And yeah, that's my favourite free hit 2019. The reason I didn't discuss it in so much depth is because I've covered a lot of it in previous parts, but I think quick summary. Finally, these are candidates to buy for this game. Now, there's a lot of players there, and there's a lot of obvious ones. And this isn't so much a section to tell you, okay, this player is better than this player, and you can buy this one. But it's more so just to show you what's available and just make it a little bit easier for you if you ever wanted something to refer to as all the options you had available to yourself that you might not have at the moment. Like I said, I think with the match interpretation and discussing about selling hits, I covered a lot of this. And if anything is missing and you would like more depth on this section, then I do think I will go and include it in solving your problems. Just let me know. The reason I have, like, for example, Elanga, Morgan Gibbs-White, and Callum Hudson-Odoi in the same row with like forward slash, but Cliver and Semenyo in a different line is because I think that Cliver is a better asset than Semenyo at the moment. So I just wanted to show that. Whereas I think with Elanga, Morgan Gibbs-White, and Callum Hudson-Odoi, it's a lot closer. I would probably have Callum Hudson-Odoi on the lower end of those three for this particular game, just because I think someone who's going to crush the box a little bit more in the form of like Gibbs-White or even Elanga with his runs, more likely to score. And that's pretty much about it. But I think going back to Bournemouth, Semenyo's transitional threat, especially in this game, and the fact that he kind of just seems due, I would say is a really good buy. And Van Nilsson looked really good against Spurs. The only thing with him is, like, given how Bournemouth's schedule falls, maybe he gets benched in 30, which wouldn't be ideal for Ipswich at home, considering he's coming back for injury. But considering how quickly he came back, and given he's fit enough to play in the system in the first place, maybe he gets some minutes regardless, even if not a start. And then Aina, Marilla, Milenkovic. Again, I probably could have put Aina above Marilla and Milenkovic for the reasons discussed in the free hit section. Continuing with the Bournemouth-Brentford game, Wilson and Bremo. I wouldn't personally go for one of the defenders or goalkeeper. I think it's just too much of a risk. Some people are going to sell Henderson, hence why I brought Flecken up. But yeah, I think Wilson and Bremo could do well, especially Johan Wilson type of game. Delap, for the reason that I mentioned, if you're going to back against Forest and back against their defence, may as well have a piece of Ipswich, and at least he's got the ceiling to go alongside. Haaland is obvious. Marmoush I've spoken about a lot. Same with Guardiola. Foden, I'm not 100% sure on his expected minutes, but I do think he'll start, and he's been close to returns, like closer than it's been made out to be. And as such, I think going there is cool. Right now, Nori and Strand Larsen for the reasons discussed. Unlikely with Bruno, Garnacho, Dalot, and Onana. Onana, I'd say, it has a decent ceiling, just given United's tendency to concede chances. And like I said, this is very much a slide to refer to, as opposed to having some in-depth analysis as to who to buy. I think I covered a lot in the other sections. And like I said, if you need any more, just let me know, and I'll include it in solving your problem. And that is all she wrote for this video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed it. I apologize that it's later than usual. Life just got in the way a little bit, but nonetheless, like I said, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like on the video and equally subscribe, as we are so close to 7,000 subscribers. I shall see you tomorrow or even today for team selection, depending on when you watch it. And until then, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.